what I also want to say quickly is that, especially my second book, An End Upside Down Living, I talk about the awakening journey, and I study a lot of cases of people who have awakened, both in contemporary times, but also historically, and there are lots of patterns. And there's this notion that the enlightenment process is a process of subtraction, meaning it's getting rid of our assumptions and old paradigms and allowing something new to emerge.
Mm-hmm.
And by doing that, then we allow that something new to emerge. It's a bit counterintuitive, subtraction rather than addition in a way.
Right. I got it. Okay. So let's talk about the upside down thinking that our world is living in or awakening to. It's so fundamental.
Yes, it's fundamental. And what I'm about to describe is not where I started on the journey. I started with anomalies. So phenomena that seemed to exist that did not match the paradigm I had for the nature of reality. But as I studied more and more, the anomalies started to congeal into a general theme and a general question, which is really what An End to Upside Down Thinking is about, which is about whether or how the brain could create consciousness. So the brain is just a physical structure in our skull, but consciousness is this thing that people talk about a lot, but it's very difficult to define because we can't touch it. It's not a physical thing. I can touch my body, I can touch the chair, but I can't touch consciousness. It's a very abstract thing. And yet it is the part of us that has experience. It's our subjective inner awareness. So without consciousness, we wouldn't be able to even ask these questions or experience the physical world. And therein lies what's known as the hard problem of consciousness, which is how is it something physical like a brain could create something non-physical like consciousness? And I was shocked to learn that science doesn't know the answer to that question. And in fact, Science Magazine, a very mainstream, credible organization, laid out its top 25 questions remaining in all of science. And number 2 on the list, in the way they phrase it, is what is the biological basis of consciousness? So in the question, they're assuming that there is a biological basis of consciousness, that consciousness comes from biology. And they're just asking, well, how does that happen? What I say in the book, and this is the upside down thinking, is no, it's not the brain that produces consciousness, but consciousness comes first, and the brain is like a filtering mechanism. Some might call it a blindfold, a processor, an antenna receiver for consciousness. So to lay it out even further, more generally, there's a philosophy in science known as scientific materialism, sometimes called physicalism, which says, and this was my belief system, I didn't know at the time, but I was a physicalist, a materialist. It says 13.8 billion years ago, roughly, there was a big bang. We don't know how that happened, but grant us this one miracle and we'll explain everything else. That's the theory. So there was a big bang and it filled the universe with atoms of matter. So physical stuff all over the place. And then you have pieces of matter colliding with each other. We call that chemistry. So you have lots of chemical reactions in this big universe. And then randomly what happens in what Richard Dawkins, and he wrote a book called The Selfish Gene, and he's an evolutionary biologist. He calls it a primordial soup of stuff floating around. You end up with a self-replicating molecule like DNA. And then that leads to the evolution of life, like a human being, which develops a brain. And then poof, consciousness pops out of the brain. So we started with matter and then consciousness comes afterwards. That's the paradigm. And if you believe that, the brain creates consciousness and that it comes from matter, then when the brain dies, there is no more consciousness. You also might believe that there are no such things as psychic abilities because consciousness is localized to the brain. It's just something that's stuck in your skull. It's not non-local. It can't transcend space and time. Those are crazy ideas because it's just emerging from the brain. The paradigm that I suggest in the book, which many other people have suggested, is we don't have to throw out material science, physics, chemistry, and biology, or neuroscience. We just have to recontextualize consciousness and say consciousness comes first. Max Planck, the Nobel Prize winning physicist, he said in 1931, I regard consciousness as fundamental. I regard matter as derivative of consciousness. That is the key. That's what I'm talking about when I say upside down thinking. And I'll pause there.
Yeah, I just want to say that just to bring in a little Bible, I don't know how you feel about that, but in the beginning was the Word. It didn't say in the beginning was matter. And It's like the Word, I think, is a representation of consciousness. That's how I see it. in the beginning was consciousness. I think the mystics have always kind of known this, and science is catching up. But in the beginning was not a molecule, was not a block, was not a man. In the beginning was this word. It was, and I know it's just a writing, but I think it's kind of accurately describes this paradigm.
I agree. And another compelling piece of evidence for me was that if you look at spiritual traditions all over the world, the mystical sects of those traditions say the same thing, that we are
Yeah.
part of an interconnected field of consciousness. They might use different words to describe it. The analogy that I like to use comes from a philosopher, Dr. Bernardo Kastrup, who says that all reality could be compared to a stream of water, an infinite stream where water represents consciousness. And each of us is like a whirlpool, a localization within the broader stream. So we feel like an individual, and at one level we are an individual, but at another level we're interconnected. These are age-old traditional thoughts that I was wondering, like, how could it be that they were saying the same thing, that now a lot of science and quantum physics is pointing to this too? That was another data point that was powerful for me.
Yeah, science, I always say science is kind of catching up. But even if you're a spiritual person, and even if you know that consciousness precedes matter, it's still kind of a head thing we have with it, like, because we're living in a world where the paradigm is materialism. So, like, even though I know that consciousness precedes everything, the world I'm living in is a materialistic world, and it's 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 challenging for me to hold on to consciousness when everything looks separate and everything looks solid and everything, so, and I'm stuck in the paradigm because I was born in this paradigm.
Yes.